Hello and welcome back. So we had been discussing about Pritchard and the various skeptical and anti-skeptical challenges for our work on epistemology that has been introduced for our 6th semester NEP students in University of Delhi. This is Dr. Ananya Barwa, teaching in the Department of Philosophy, Hindu College. Continuing further, we would be now discussing Pritchard versus other anti-skeptical strategies. So if we look at the PPT here, we would see about the theory of Mooreanism. And Mooreanism, as the very name suggests, was floated by G.E. Moore. Now, Moore's response to skepticism was that he simply asserts, I know I have my hands, therefore skepticism is false. Now, how does Pritchard differs from Moore? Pritchard thinks this is too dogmatic. We need an explanation of why we can reject skepticism. Going further, there was also this theory called Contextualism of De Rose or Cohen, and their response to skepticism has been no means different things in different contexts. We do know in everyday cases, but not in skeptical ones. How does Pritchard differ here? He rejects contextual shifts. Knowledge should be stable. Reliabilism, Dirtske, Nozick, where their response has been knowledge does not require ruling out all skeptical scenarios, just tracking the truth in normal conditions. And Pritchard thinks disjunctivism offers better explanation of perceptual knowledge. So we see that Pritchard's key contributions has been it keeps the closure but weakens skepticism's force by showing we do not need to know anti-skeptical claims. He uses disjunctivism to argue that perceptual knowledge is stronger than skeptics assume, provides a middle ground between dogmatic anti-skepticism and a full-blown skepticism. And this is beautiful, for most of our philosophical giants have always preached this, be it Buddha's Madhyamik Karika, the middle path, or Aristotle's golden mean. As long as there is a middle ground, things are sorted. Further, Pritchard's anti-skepticism in contemporary debates, AI, virtual reality, and simulation skepticism, we see that the responses to radical skepticism, especially his epistemological disjunctivism and defense of perceptual knowledge, has significant implications for modern debates on AI, VR, virtual reality, and the simulation hypothesis. The AI and VR skeptical challenge with advances there, traditional brain in a vat or BIV skepticism has evolved into real-world concerns. So if AI can generate ultra-realistic simulations, how can we trust that we are not already inside one, which is the AI-generated realities? The deep fake skepticism, where if AI can produce indistinguishable deep fakes, how do we trust our perceptual beliefs? Virtual reality skepticism, what if our real world is just an advanced simulation? So we see that Pritchard's epistemological disjunctivism against AI skepticism, Pritchard's disjunctivist response to skepticism can be extended to modern AI and VR-based skeptical challenges. When we genuinely perceive something, our perceptual knowledge is directly connected to reality. In contrast, when we are deceived, we are in a completely different epistemic state, not just a weaker form of knowledge, but something fundamentally distinct. If we are not in a simulation, then our perceptual experiences directly connect us to the world, giving us genuine knowledge. If we are in a simulation, then our perception is not a degraded form of knowledge, but something entirely different. Thus, the skeptic's assumption that we must rule out all AI, VR deception before claiming knowledge is mistaken. We can still have real knowledge even if we cannot disprove AI-driven deception scenarios. Another modern challenge is AI-generated deepfake skepticism, where AI can fabricate hyper-realistic images, videos, and voices. If AI can fool our senses, how do we trust any perceptual evidence? If I see or hear something, I must know it is not an AI deepfake to claim knowledge. I cannot always tell if something is an AI deepfake. Therefore, I do not know if my perception is real. So, we do not need to disprove all AI deception cases to trust our knowledge. In normal, non-deceptive cases, our perception genuinely tracks reality. Deepfake deception is not part of ordinary perception but an exceptional case, meaning that the possibility of AI fakes does not undermine all perceptual knowledge, thus resulting in the possibility of AI generated deception is an external risk, not an inherent flaw in perception. Thus, we can still trust most of our knowledge. Now, one of the most debated AI-based skeptical challenges is Nick Bostrom's simulation hypothesis, which argues if advanced civilizations can create perfect simulations of consciousness, then simulated beings would vastly outnumber real ones. If this is the case, we are more likely simulated than real. Skeptical conclusion: we cannot be certain we are in base reality. So if we are not in a simulation, then our perceptual knowledge is directly connected to reality. If we are in simulation, then our experiences are radically different, and the skeptical argument collapses because we are not being deceived about our world. We are simply living in a different kind of reality. Thus, either way, we have knowledge of something real, whether it is base reality or a simulated one. Thus, the result, the simulation hypothesis, does not lead to skepticism because knowledge is still possible within any consistent reality framework. Thus, Pritchard's anti-skeptical strategy is highly relevant today as AI, deep fakes, virtual reality or VR raises new epistemological problems. His disjunctivist view allows us to trust our perceptual knowledge without needing to disprove radical skeptical scenarios, rejects the demand for absolute certainty. We can have justified knowledge without eliminating all skeptical doubts. Apply his insights to modern challenges such as AI deception, VR experiences, and the simulation hypothesis. So, Mooreanism and Contextualism. In relation to skeptics, we see that in epistemology, skepticism raises fundamental doubts about our knowledge of the external world, especially when we are confronted with hypothetical scenarios like a brain in a vat or being deceived by an evil demon. Philosophers have responded to these challenges in various ways, and two significant approaches have been Mooreanism and Contextualism. Now, if we quickly revise about Mooreanism, we know that the historical context and literature review. Mooreanism is named after the British philosopher G.E. Moore, who is best known for his common sense approach to philosophy. In 1903, in his seminal essay, Proof of an External World, Moore famously argued that skepticism is self-refuting. The key idea in Mooreanism is that we already have knowledge of the external world, and that claims to the contrary should be rejected. Moore believed that common sense and ordinary knowledge are more reliable than skeptical hypothesis experience. We also see that Moore's argument, which is the hard argument, Moore famously raised his hand and stated, "Here is one hand and here is another," asserting that he knows that he has two hands. The argument goes that if we know these, then we know the existence of the external world because these hands are part of the external world. Moore's assertion of knowledge based on common sense directly conflicts with the skeptical premise that we cannot know anything about the external world. Moore famously said about his hand that, here is one hand and so I know it exists. So to show that knowledge of ordinary objects are self-evident. In contrast to the skeptic who doubts everything, Moore thought it was more rational to affirm knowledge of the world based on common sense and direct experience. Now, skepticism and certainty, Mooreanism directly addresses the challenge which argues that we cannot have knowledge of the external world because we cannot rule out radical skeptical scenarios. Example, we might be brains in vats. Moore rejects the skepticism and claims that we can be certain of basic facts about the world, such as having hands or existing in a physical environment. The core problem for Mooreanism is the challenge of reconciling certainty in everyday knowledge with the skeptical challenge, which calls into question whether certainty in ordinary knowledge is possible at all. So, we see that the strength of Mooreanism is its intuitive and practical approach. Moore's approach aligns with our ordinary intuitions and experiences. It is easier to affirm that we know we have hands than to engage in complex skeptical arguments. Direct challenge to skepticism, Mooreanism directly confronts skepticism and refuses to yield to skeptical hypotheses. It provides a simple and bold refutation of radical skepticism. Common sense realism. Moore's approach affirms the reliability of common sense and everyday knowledge, which may find attractive because it resists over intellectualization of basic beliefs. Now, the weaknesses, however, of Mooreanism is its dogmatic approach, where critics argue that Moore's approach is dogmatic and lacks the sophistication required to address the complexity of skepticism. By simply asserting knowledge of ordinary things, Mooreanism does not offer a robust philosophical explanation of why we cannot be certain. The Moorean paradox, Moore's assertion that we know both, that we have hands, and that the skeptical hypothesis is false, seems contradictory. If Moore claims to know both, it leads to an internal conflict, relies on ordinary intuitions. Mooreanism is vulnerable to the charge that it relies too heavily on common sense and does not engage with deep philosophical analysis of skepticism. And Pritchard's response has been that Pritchard would likely argue that Mooreanism fails to offer a true resolution to skepticism. While Moore's approach is appealing in its simplicity, it does not explain why the skeptic's challenge is flawed or how we can justify knowledge beyond ordinary experience. Mooreanism leaves critical questions unanswered about how we justify knowledge when confronted with skeptical arguments. Pritchard might suggest that a more sophisticated anti-skeptical approach like epistemological disjunctivism provides a better way forward. Now, the other ism, which is the contextualism, and if we quickly trace the historicity, we understand, and we have reiterating this again, that contextualism is a more recent development in epistemology, with philosophers like Keith D. Rose and David Lewis leading to the charge in the 1990s. Contextualism emerged as a way to reconcile ordinary knowledge with the skeptical challenge by introducing the idea that the standards for knowledge vary depending on the context in which knowledge claims are made. The core theory of contextualism is that whether or not someone knows something depends on the context of the conversation. In everyday situations, when stakes are low, we may rightfully claim knowledge, example, knowing that we have hands. However, when the stakes are high, example in the context of skepticism, the standards for claiming knowledge becomes more stringent. In skeptical scenarios, the bar for knowledge is set higher and we cannot claim knowledge of external facts. In ordinary life, we may be confident that we know we have hands, but in a skeptical context, example being asked to consider the possibility of living in a simulation, we would need to meet more demanding criteria to claim knowledge. The core challenge for contextualism is thus determining how much context matters in determining whether knowledge claims are true. Skeptical challenges push for higher thresholds for knowledge, while ordinary contexts do not demand such rigor. Now, if we talk about the strengths of contextualism, we see its flexibility approach. So, contextualism provides a nuanced approach to knowledge which claims that can account for different scenarios. It shifts the burden of proof depending on the context. It avoids radical skepticism, that is, contextualism successfully avoids the paralyzing effect of radical skepticism by allowing knowledge claims to be context dependent. It maintains that we can know things in low stakes context while acknowledging the challenge of more skeptical scenarios. Now, if we talk about the weaknesses of contextualism, it is definitely the shifting standards, where critics argue that contextualism undermines the idea of knowledge by suggesting that it is too context dependent. Knowledge claims become unstable and it becomes difficult to distinguish between knowledge and mere confidence. The nose problem, that is, contextualism might have trouble explaining why in certain skeptical contexts we cannot claim knowledge even if we are confident in our ordinary knowledge, and that is considered a weakness here. The problem of excessive skepticism, where if skepticism introduces too high a threshold, contextualism may lead to excessive skepticism, where knowledge becomes difficult to justify even in ordinary contexts. So, Pritchard is critical of contextualism, particularly because it does not offer a clear answer to the skeptical challenge. He argues that shifting standards do not sufficiently explain why we can know things in low-stake contexts. Pritchard believes contextualism is too flexible as it does not provide a rigorous framework to justify knowledge claims. Thus, the way out is Pritchard's epistemological disjunctivism. Pritchard's epistemological disjunctivism offers a way forward. Unlike Mooreanism, which simply asserts knowledge, and contextualism, which adjusts standards, Pritchard argues that when we genuinely perceive something, we have direct access to the world. Even when we are deceived, we are in a fundamentally different epistemic state than when we have true perceptual knowledge. This direct connection to reality means that even in skeptical scenarios are possible, like brain in a vat, they do not undermine our knowledge of the external world, because the epistemic situation in genuine perception is distinct from any skeptic hypothesis. Thus, we see that Mooreanism provides a bold defense of common sense, but is criticized for being too dogmatic and lacking philosophical depth. Contextualism offers a flexible and context-dependent approach, but risks making knowledge claims unstable and subject to excessive skepticism. Pritchard's disjunctivism provides a stronger way to defend our knowledge without needing to shift standards or rely on dogmatic assertions, and it remains resistant to skepticism while acknowledging its force. So, in comparing Mooreanism and contextualism in relation to skepticism and considering how Pritchard responds to both, here is a breakdown of which approach might fare better in addressing the skeptical challenge. So, quickly, Mooreanism is bold but dogmatic, strengths simple and intuitive, which is Moore's approach is grounded in common sense, which many people find appealing. It's easy to accept that we know we have hands and can assert this with confidence. Direct attack on skepticism. Moore boldly asserts that we do know things about the world regardless of skeptical scenarios. This is refreshing counterpoint to the paralyzing effects of radical skepticism. Weaknesses, lack of justification, the Moorean paradox ignores a skepticism's force. Now, Pritchard's response could be, something to do like Mooreanism is insufficient because it does not explain how we can justify knowledge claims in the face of skepticism. Moore simply denies skepticism without addressing its epistemological foundations. Now, contextualism, again, quickly, it is flexible but potentially unstable. Strengths are it is flexible. It preserves ordinary knowledge, that is in low stakes situation, and it addresses Moorean paradox, where contextualism does provide a way of understanding why Moore's assertion about knowledge in low stakes situations don't conflict with the skeptical challenge in higher stakes context. Weaknesses, however, are many, and to name few, it's too context dependent, it doesn't fully resolve skepticism, and is a risk of excessive skepticism. So, Pritchard's response thus would argue that contextualism lacks depth because it fails to address the real epistemic structure behind knowledge claims. Thus, what then is a more sophisticated solution? It has been Pritchard's disjunctivism, where it engages with direct engagement with skepticism and avoids contextual shifting, resistant to radical skepticism. Weaknesses, the complexity, then the practical application. So, the conclusion then, who did better in the skeptical challenge? Mooreanism was too simplistic and dogmatic. While it offers a quick dismissal of skepticism, it fails to engage with the deeper epistemic structures. Contextualism offers more flexibility, but this can come at the cost of stability. The idea that knowledge standards shift depending on context is attractive for preserving ordinary knowledge, but it does not adequately resolve the core issues of skepticism. Thus, Pritchard's disjunctivism seems to offer a stronger solution because it directly addresses the epistemic situation in skeptical scenarios. Unlike Mooreanism or contextualism, it provides a rigorous defense of knowledge that is resistant to skeptical challenges. While more complex, disjunctivism offers a clearer and more philosophically satisfying answer to skepticism by distinguishing genuine knowledge from deception or error. Thus, easily, Pritchard's epistemological disjunctivism, or simply disjunctivism, appears to offer the most robust response to skepticism, addressing both the nature of perception and the skeptical challenge in a way that Mooreanism and contextualism fail to do. So, it is Pritchard's epistemological disjunctivism. And if we are to address it or come to the conclusion now, we see that the current status of disjunctivism, it remains an important and vibrant part of the epistemological landscape. with Pritchard's work continuing to influence debates on skepticism, perception, and epistemic justification. While the theory has been refined by other philosophers, it still faces important criticisms, particularly regarding its general applicability and the challenges of explaining perception in light of modern cognitive science. However, its philosophical appeal, especially its direct realism and its focus on genuine knowledge, ensures that disjunctivism will continue to be a key player in discussions of skepticism, perception, and epistemology in the coming years. So, this is what we have been discussing about the problem of other minds, of how do we perceive other minds vis-a-vis artificial intelligence. And with this, the connected issue has been about skepticism, where we have discussed about Mooreanism, contextualism, and how Duncan Pritchard's work about hypothetical, about epistemological disjunctivism comes as a rescue. Thank you so much.